Good morning. Can you all hear me? Yes. Perfect. I love that they gave us a luxury room. It's like first class. You all have lots of space. You can spread out. We're going to bring some blankets and drinks in about 5 minutes to just get very comfortable. Thank you for being here on the Friday of reInvent. I know that's not always an easy ask. We appreciate your time, and hopefully this will be a good use of that. So I'm Philip. I've been with AWS for about 5.5 years, and I focus on security strategy for AWS Marketplace. And what that means is I try and find ways where security is causing friction, and let's try and automate and reduce that friction where possible, which is the topic of today's talk.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leno Paperi. I'm a solutions architect with AWS Marketplace, and I've been helping partners and ISVs list their solutions on AWS Marketplace for the past 2.5 years now. Really excited to be here. I'm going to awkwardly jump off stage, and I'll be back a little bit later in the presentation.
Okay, so why are we here? What are we talking about? I'm guessing if you're here on a Friday morning, you know what vendor risk assessment is, so I won't spend too much time on that, but I suspect you're here because it's a pain point that you're aware of, either as a buyer or a seller. Over the last few years, we did a lot of research into this space, and we surveyed hundreds of customers, and the questions in the survey were quite open-ended, but it was, what can Marketplace do to help you procure software easier or faster? And number one on that survey was the pain point of vendor risk assessment. The feedback customers gave us was, Marketplace has made it quite easy to find software and to buy software, but we need help starting to use that software because the vendor risk assessment process has been slowing that down. And the market factors that we know are happening is, there's more and more rigor being placed on ensuring you have a secure software supply chain. There's an executive order here in the US that's kicking in the middle of January that will make this even more top of mind for customers and sellers. And whenever you do this, you're introducing friction. And in the world of vendor risk assessment, you can substitute the word friction for paperwork. Paperwork is what slows this all down. We'll talk through some of the problems in a second, but as part of our surveying of these customers, we looked at the questionnaires that customers are sending to buyers or to sellers today. And it ranged from 200 questions to well over 1,000 questions. And that's friction. The second part that really surprised us is not just that paperwork is still the way to do this, but there's so much trust in this process. It's very hard to validate the information that's being sent back in these questionnaires. These are problems that we want to address with vendor insights. Whenever you introduce friction, you're introducing risk because people will bypass those hurdles you set up to really understand the software. And so the shadow IT happens. If you make it too hard for the employee to do the right thing, they'll go around you. They'll use a credit card, and they'll get it done because they feel pressure to do their job, and you're inhibiting their ability to do that job. When we're talking to those customers, we get quotes. This is my favorite one because it's so simple. A bad week is one when we have to spend more time explaining security posture than improving it. And it really hits at the heart of the problem. We spend so much time and resources and hard to find security and compliance people on this paperwork problem. It just doesn't make sense. And that's why customers ranked it number one as a problem that we should address. And there's two sides to this coin. I see from the lanyards we have both buyers and sellers in this room. The buyers have a slightly different problem, which is they're being forced to evaluate software. And so every buyer will have their own questionnaire. They're never the same. They all sound and look slightly different. I think there's a consultant that shops this questionnaire around and just changes it slightly so it's unique. But what it means is it's very hard to automatically answer that questionnaire. It takes humans to read it and humans to answer those questions. But what the buyers need is access to software faster. So they need the ability to solve their internal end users' problems as fast as possible. But what they told us is this current process takes them months. And the reason it takes months is they're always evaluating more than one vendor for that solution. They don't just pick one, they evaluate 2 or 3. So they're sending out questionnaires to 2 or 3 different companies, and those companies take time to respond to it. The questionnaires themselves, I suspect many of you have seen them, it's full of questions that are not overly hard to answer necessarily, it just takes time. But one of the challenges for the buyers is how do you validate the answers? If it's a paper-based questionnaire, an Excel spreadsheet, a web page with questions, that it takes a while for the right answers to get into that questionnaire, and then for the ISV to validate that information. So the way they do it today, the sellers, is they'll do an audit, do an ISO 27001 or a SOC 2. The downside of audits is their point in time. So yes, the information is accurate, but it was accurate 1 year ago or 6 months ago. So these are problems that buyers said, hey, there has to be a better way. And I wouldn't say I'm passionate about paperwork, but I'm passionate about getting rid of paperwork. And this was a great opportunity for AWS to step in and help. The last point on here is, once you've gone through this process once with that vendor, well, how do you know when something changes? And so the way that buyers do this today is 12 months later, they send the same questionnaire back out and try and figure out what's changed in 12 months. And that's terribly inefficient, not just for the buyer, but also for the seller. Now, the software vendor, they hate paperwork just as much as everyone else, but they have to do it. And so the challenge that the software vendors have is they've invested millions of dollars in having a secure security posture. How do they get that messaging out? How do they make that a differentiator, not a friction point? And so they told us on the seller side is we need help too. We're hiring teams of 6 or 12 compliance people who do nothing all day but copy and paste answers to fill in these questionnaires. That's not a good job, and it's not a fun job for anyone. But again, it's also not a useful way of doing this. If we can automate that, the information is more up to date, it's validated, and it's just a much easier and faster process. What the sellers told us is it takes about 8 to 10 weeks for them to satisfy the buyer's needs and tell them, here's all the information you want. All the back and forth validation questions, that just adds more and more time. And then they spend money on the audits. The average price for a SOC 2 audit is almost $100,000. And you repeat that every year, and every country has their own compliance standards. And again, those are fantastic because they're very accurate, but they're point in time and they're out of date the moment that they're printed. And of course, they also just like repeating this process over and over again. If anyone here has been in sales, on the last day of the quarter, the last thing you want is a buyer to say, here is a 300-question questionnaire. We can't buy your software until it's done. And it happens every single quarter end across every single company. Everyone has this challenge. So I'm going to hand off to Leno here to kind of take you through how we solve this problem.
Thank you, Philip, and hello again, everyone. I'm really excited to be here because I get to present the solution to all the challenges that Philip just described. And that solution is Vendor Insights, which is a new feature on AWS Marketplace. And Vendor Insights is going to make it faster and easier for customers to procure software through AWS Marketplace. And it's going to allow them to do that in a way that makes them feel comfortable that what they're buying is both secure and compliant with their requirements. So let's see what Vendor Insights is. So in the simplest sense, Vendor Insights is a customer-facing dashboard or profile that surfaces security and compliance information about the vendor's SaaS solution to the customer. And it answers questions that the customer would want to know before they purchase the product and throughout the lifetime of that subscription. These are questions like, where is my data stored? Is it encrypted? How do you govern access to the accounts that have my data? These are all very, very important questions for customers. Vendor Insights answers 125 of these questions, and we call them controls. And these controls are backed with multiple evidence sources. So quite frankly, an answer to a question without proof isn't that valuable to customers. They want proof. We didn't guess what these controls are either. We talked to customers, as Philip mentioned. And this evidence is collected automatically in a continuous way, so it's always up to date. And Vendor Insights also has notifications as well. So if the control changes, parties involved are notified of that change, right? And the idea here isn't to frighten or cause panic. The idea is to enable that transparency so both customers and vendors can act accordingly in a way that's, again, secure and compliant. That's the big theme here. And the last point here is that this continuous reporting and notification systems is going to enable customers that are either in the process of moving or have already moved from a point-in-time annual assessment process to one that's a continuous assessment process, reevaluation, which is more secure. Right. So that's what Vendor Insights is. Let's talk about how it actually works, kind of underneath the hood here. Now, there's a fact of life here that if you give a solutions architect an audience, they will present an architecture diagram. I promise you this is the only one in the whole presentation, and it's a pretty simple one in comparison. So at its core, Vendor Insights is an evidence gathering solution. Let's talk about what those evidence sources are and how we gather that evidence with Vendor Insights. The first evidence source, Phil mentioned earlier, is your industry standard security audit reports. Today, Vendor Insights supports your SOC 2 and ISO reports. So how this works. After deploying Vendor Insights into the SaaS provider's environment, it provides a mechanism for that vendor to share those reports with the Vendor Insights team. Our team is then going to review those reports and apply set the controls on the Vendor Insights profile according to those reports. That's your first source of evidence there. For your second source of evidence, now, as mentioned earlier, right, audit reports are great, but they're point in time, and it might happen once a year. Well, a lot can change in a year. You know, customers want that continuous assessment. They want to make sure that everything that they're seeing is up to date. How do we do that? Well, we do it with AWS Config. So what Vendor Insights does is it's actually going to deploy a config conformance pack in accounts that have production workloads for the SaaS solution. And config is going to collect that evidence, and it's going to surface it to AWS Audit Manager. And that Audit Manager assessment, which again Vendor Insights creates, is what feeds the vendor assessment profile, and ultimately what the customers are seeing. This is awesome for a lot of reasons. One, as a vendor, you don't have to dedicate resources to doing those audits yourself. It's automated for you. And two, for the customer, they know that that evidence is coming from an AWS service, right? That builds confidence when they're thinking about purchasing your SaaS solution. Now, the third source of evidence is a little manual, right? Right now, there are 30 controls that aren't answered with AWS Config or through the ISO reports, and these are largely related to business operation questions. But Vendor Insights makes it really easy for the vendor to answer these controls one time and make them available to customers on demand when they need them. And then that's enabled through AWS Auto Manager as well, where you see the controls and you can answer those questionnaires and make them present on the Vendor Insights profile. Okay, so that's what it is. Now, seeing is believing, right? So let's actually see what that profile looks like. Give me one moment here, and I'll set up a demo for you. Okay, perfect. I think everyone can see that okay. We're not going to be looking at text, so it should be fine there. But we'll zoom in a couple times. Cool. So I'm starting off here on the AWS Marketplace. And I have a filter set, so we're seeing all the SaaS solutions that are available on Marketplace. Right now, Vendor Insights is applying to SaaS solutions. So right away, you might notice that there is a badge on a couple of these listings. So we see that Trend Micro listing up top. We see Vendor Insights. So that indicates that this listing has a Vendor Insights profile associated with it. Now, if I wanted to filter for just listings that have Vendor Insights profiles, I can do that. If I scroll down here on the left, we'll see a new filter added for security profiles. Let's click on that. And now I have all my profiles that have Vendor Insights enabled. If I scroll down again, I also see a filter here with some sub-items that let me filter for profiles that also have your SOC 2 and ISO reports on there. So I can do that. Let's look for all reports that have SOC 2 as well. Now let's click into one of these and see what we have. So I'm going to jump into this product by Wiz. If I scroll down, I see this new section on the product detail page. And it lets me know that this profile has a Vendor Insights, this product has a Vendor Insights profile associated with, and also presents the certificates associated with this product up front. And I have a link here that's going to show me some more. So let's click into that and see what we have. Oh, apologies. I didn't pray enough to the demo gods, so that's on me. Perfect. So here we have an overview of the Vendor Insights profile. And it gives me some information right away. When the profile was last updated, I have information about the data sources, where that evidence is coming from. I also have an idea of where the data is stored. In this case, we have locations globally. And it also allows the vendor to attach links to important information that customers might want. So here, we see that Wiz has added an availability status. And it points them to their site that shows availability. So this is all great information to have up front, right? But let's say a customer wants some more information on this. Well, they could go to security and compliance. And right away, you'll see that nothing's coming up on here. There's a good reason for this, right? The information that Vendor Insights is presenting can obviously be sensitive, right? It's not information that you might want out in the public, right? You want it to the customers that are looking to purchase your product. So for all Vendor Insights profile, the information that we're going to see what's in here for another demo product, this information needs to be requested by the customer. And to do that, the customer simply clicks on Request Access, and they provide some information, essentially contact information, right? And then they would submit the request. The vendor then reaches out to the customer and provides an NDA. The customer fills out that NDA, and once that agreement is in place, the vendor chooses to enable the Vendor Insights profile for that customer. So I'm going to show you the detailed profile, but absolutely not for Wiz. I have a demo product prepared in advance, so I'm going to switch over to that profile now, and we'll explore what we see there later. OK, so here I'm just going to go to Vendor Insights, and I'm just in the Marketplace console. And I'll click onto this demo product I've prepared. Again, we're familiar with this overview page now, but let's go to security and compliance. And here's the magic. We see more. So we have 125 controls total, right? And right next to that number, we see 76. These are the controls that have evidence either collected automatically by AWS config or evidence that's collected from those SOC 2 and ISO reports, right? And then we also see that in this case, there are evidence sources that are self-attestations, right? So the vendor in this case has answered these controls, and 49 of them. And we also see some non-compliant controls. We're going to take a look at those a little bit later. But first, let's explore some of the control categories. I'm going to quickly scroll through these control categories, but you should see names that are familiar, right? We picked these categories based off of conversations we've had with customers and standard industry practices, right? So it should all look very familiar to you. And again, this is 125 controls. We're not going to look at all of them. Let's just pick one and dive a little bit deeper into it. So let's do data encryption, because I mentioned that earlier. And is all data encrypted in transit? Well, before I click into that, let me talk about the columns that we see here on this page. So you see the control. These are the questions that we were talking about earlier. And right after that, you see the workloads on AWS. These are your automated evidence sources, right? So if it says compliant on there, you know that that compliance is coming from an AWS config rule. Then you have your SOC 2 and ISO reports, evidence from that. And then the last column there is the vendor's self-assessment on there. All right, let's drill into, is all data encrypted? And the answer is yes. And here I see the various evidence sources. And you'll notice this annotation feature as well. So evidence sources can be annotated. In this case, both evidence sources, the annotations coming from the Vendor Insights team. So in this situation, one, you have automatic evidence collection from config, and you also have the ISO reports that are validating this report. This is very beneficial to customers because they feel confident that this is what's going on in that SaaS environment. Now let's take a look at an instance of a non-compliant control. I'm going to this first one here. And we see non-compliant here to the control. does the application support two-factor authentication? Well, we can find out more by clicking into this. We do say the control status is not compliant, but there's annotation on there that might be helpful to customers. So it says, no, our application does not support two-factor natively, but we support two-factor multi-authentication through SSO integration identity providers. This is beneficial information for your customers. And again, the idea here isn't to simply say, no, this is not compliant, this is a bad product. The idea is to make it transparent and allows the vendor to share additional context about that status that would be beneficial. So as a customer, I might be okay with this. And that's the goal here with Vendor Insights, is to provide that transparency. Okay. So I'm going to jump back into slides a little bit. There we go. Cool. So Vendor Insights, as you saw, helps solve the customer challenge. Buyers can self-service their assessment process. It's self-service is more convenient for them. It's frankly faster. And it gives them the confidence that what they're seeing there is up to date and current. The information is easy to find and also easy to digest. I'm going to share a customer quote here. So we have this awesome quote from CyberOne Security, and it really shows the testament that we're getting from customers on this. For a business buying a SaaS solution, it can be really scary because that business is trusting that SaaS vendor with their information and potentially their customers' information. Vendor Insights gives that purchaser the confidence that what product they're buying is going to do right by their data. It also solves the vendor challenge. I love that quote that Philip brought earlier, right? A bad week is one where I have to spend more time explaining security than improving it. The goal is for that not to happen anymore. Automated evidence means your resources, your security resources, can spend more time doing things that are productive, not answering repeated questions over and over again. And this continuous monitoring and transparency is going to help the vendor earn the customer's trust, because that's ultimately what the customer wants. They want to be able to see what's going on with their data, what's happening in the environment. Vendors are really excited about this. And I'm happy to say that as today at launch, we have 40 vendors who already have Vendor Insights profiles with us today. And these can all be found on AWS Marketplace. Let's see what they're saying. And there's two themes to really point out here, and I think these quotes do a great job of expressing that. One, Vendor Insights reduces the time it takes to go through the procurement process for customers. Big idea here is attesting to going from weeks down to hours. That's what we're hearing from our vendors. And the other theme here is on the buyer side. Buyers are purchasing with more confidence that what they're buying is going to not only meet their needs, but it's going to meet those needs in a secure and compliant way. Okay. So I really want you to come out of this knowing that establishing Vendor Insights is really easy. So I'm actually going to do a demo here of what that onboarding process looks like. So if you're an independent solution provider providing SaaS to Marketplace right now today, it's going to be extremely, extremely relevant for you, because it's going to show how easy you can start doing this. If you aren't, this will give you another great reason to consider it. So I'll do a few things in this demo here, and I'll just talk them at a high level before I go through it all. First, I'm going to retrieve 2 CloudFormation templates from a repository that we have public. And these are the only templates that I'm going to need to deploy this solution. And then I'm going to walk you through how I upload my SOC 2 and ISO evidence sources. And in the last part, I'm going to give you an example of how we will do one of those manual attestations. And then we'll close it out with how you request the profile be created. OK, so one moment here. All right. So I'm going to start by going to the Well, let's start by going to the seller guide. I'll come back to that QR code that you saw earlier, in case you want to capture if you didn't have a chance to. But that's going to take you to the seller guide. And this is really your one-stop how-to on deploying vendor insights. But we also do have a bunch of other resources, YouTube videos on this, blog posts, a ton of content for you. And we start the deployment process by visiting our GitHub repo that contains the assets you need to deploy vendor insights. So this repo has a ton of great things in it. This README gives you a more technical, in-depth overview of what's actually being deployed. I'm not going to walk you through the README, but we're going to jump into it. And then if I click here, to onboarding templates, I see a few templates. I only need to grab 2 of these templates. So I'm going to grab the prerequisites template. And this template is going to create 2 IAM roles and associated policies. I'll talk about what these do in just a minute or so. And then I'm also going to grab this onboarding template. And this is what's actually deploying the resources into your SaaS accounts that enable that evidence collection for vendor insights. All right. To do this, I will go into my AWS console. And I'm going to switch into a region that I haven't used yet. Perfect. And we're going to start with CloudFormation. And I should also make an important note here, too. So the account that I've chosen to authenticate into right now is the one that's going to be my management account. This is the account that I'm going to manage the deployment from. For even if I have a multi-account SaaS solution, I'll be doing everything from this account. And if you're listed on the marketplace today, this is also your seller account. So it's important that your seller account is the account that you're deploying the solution into. And we'll start by creating a stack. And all I'm going to do, so I had downloaded those templates I showed you earlier. All I'm going to do is put in this prerequisite stack. Next, I will name it. There are no parameters for this one. And all I have to do here is, well, I'll keep all the default configurations. And if I scroll to the bottom after reviewing everything that's being set up in this CloudFormation stack, I just need to acknowledge that this stack is going to be deploying IAM resources. I'll click on Submit. This should take, call it 15 seconds, 20 seconds to deploy. It's only 2 IAM roles. Let's talk about what those IAM roles do. So the first is an administrative role that allows CloudFormation to assume it. And this is what CloudFormation is going to be using to deploy the onboarding assets that we'll show you in a second here, too. The second is an execution role. And this execution role actually has the specific permissions needed to deploy those specific vendor insights resources that we use for evidence collection. And it's going to allow that administrative role to assume it. And these are all needed for stack sets. So we're going to be using stack sets to deploy the main onboarding piece of this. Some common questions that we get on this, right? What these roles aren't. So these roles are only there to deploy these resources, right? They're not giving the vendor insights team access into the account. They're strictly there to deploy through stack sets. And they can actually be deleted once you've completed the deployment. So, I say administrative roles, all that kind of stuff, and heads turn. I just want to know that it's just for stack sets deployment. Cool. Let's see if these completed. Great. So they completed successfully. Now I can move on to deploying the actual the onboarding solution. And I'm going to use stack sets for this. And if you aren't familiar with stack sets, I'd like to give you a quick 30-second spiel on it. The reason why we're using stack sets is because stack sets make it really easy to deploy CloudFormation stacks across multiple accounts and across multiple regions from one central location. The reason why we chose this for vendor insights is because we understand that SaaS solutions are often deployed across multiple AWS accounts. And it would be a pain to have to go into each individual account and deploy your stack to enable vendor insights, right? So this lets you do it all at once. Well, not necessarily all at once, and we'll talk about. It'll reduce the amount of stacks you have to deploy. So let's go ahead and create stack sets. Let's give this a refresh. And we have that vendor insights stack set admin ID that we had from earlier. And I also, I forgot to grab it, but if we go to that prereq stack, one of the resources that was created is this execution role. So I want to grab that execution role. I'll come back to stack sets here. And this is what I'm going to provide for that parameter. And then I'm going to, again, upload, this time, the onboarding template. Click Next. I'll give it a name. And a description. And now we see that we have some parameters to select. Let's talk about these parameters, the first 4 in particular. So there's a lot of resources that are deployed for vendor insights onboarding. Now, not all of those resources need to be present in all of your accounts if you have a multi-account SaaS solution, right? The first parameter is what's going to deploy the config conformance pack, which has the rules needed for that automated evidence collection. And that's what's going to be needed in all of your production workloads. Sorry, SaaS accounts that have production workloads. Also, there is an IAM parameter. That's also going to be needed in those accounts. But for your management account, I should say, for the account that is your management account and also your seller account, and if there are no production workloads on there, you only need the second and the fourth roles there, for second and fourth parameters there, rather. Because that's what's going to enable the vendor insights dashboard profile to pick up that evidence from the solution itself. In my purposes, I'm using one account for this to keep things simple. So I'm just going to keep the default, keep everything on. Here, our production workloads and our management account are one and the same. So I'll just keep everything on there. And then I want to provide the account ID for the management account. In this case, it's just the one that I'm in. And we'll pick the region. So this is the primary region where your management account is in. And product name. And the important thing is that there's no space in there that causes it to fail. The last parameter I want to talk about is security framework. So periodically, we are updating the security framework that defines that, the controls that are on vendor insights, right? So this parameter, if you're deploying vendor insights for the first time, you can just keep it as is. You'll get the latest and greatest, right? Now, if you're on an older security framework, and let's say that you are adding a new production account to your SaaS solution and you want to enroll that in vendor insights for automated evidence collection, this is going to let you do that simply. You just simply select the framework that you're on. You don't have to worry about template versioning or finding the template that's relevant to you. We'll hit next here. And I'm going to keep the execution configuration as inactive. And this is where the beauty of CloudFormation stack sets comes in. So here I can define a list of account IDs that I want to deploy into. Again, I'm only going to put one account ID in here. But if you had a multi-account SaaS solution, you may want to put all of your production accounts on here. But again, consider that the parameters that we set earlier in this are going to apply to any account that is put into that box over there. So realistically, if you are running a multi-SaaS solution, you are going to have 2 stack set deployments, one for the management account, and then you can do a stack set for all of your production accounts that are going to have the same parameter sets for them. But again, I'll just keep that one. And then here we are specifying what regions we want to deploy into. We can have multiple regions in a single deployment. It's just important that the first region that you select here is the one that you set as your primary region. Pick California here. And then also important, you want to keep the region concurrency set to sequential. And that's it. I review everything that I said here. I have a couple of acknowledgments. And I can click Submit. And StackSets is going to start deploying. Now, it takes roughly 5 minutes per region that you're deploying into. But I had one pre-cooked here because we weren't going to wait here 5 minutes to see what was deployed. So I switched to another region where I already have the solution up and running, and we see the stacks are deployed. So let's take a look. I'm not going to go through all the resources, but I see that all the resources that were created, but I see that one of these was an S3 bucket. Let's take a look at what was created in S3, because this is going to be the way that we add the SOC 2 and ISO reports. All right, and I have this new bucket that was created in that management account for audit reports. And all I do here is upload my most recent SOC 2 and ISO audit reports if I have them handy. Good. That's easy. That's really the second step of this. Now we're just going to do the last step, which is doing one of the manual attestations. To do that, I'm going to go to AWS Auto Manager. And I see that Vendor Insights has created a couple of assessments for me. Let's go to the self-assessment. Click into the assessment name. If I scroll down, I actually see these are all the controls, all the 125 controls that I can add annotations to or comment on. Now, if I search here for required, I'm going to find all of the controls that have that are going to require that manual comments from the vendor, right? So there's 30 of these. Let's click into one. And the question is the customer's account locked if there are multiple failed logins? For this, I could go to comments here. I'd say yes. Submit my comment. And then I'd want to update the control status to reviewed. And that's it. You do this for the other manual controls, and now you're ready to request to have your Vendor Insights profile created. And the way we do that is through a Contact Us link that is present here on the seller guide. I just click on that. Provide my contact information, and then I have to add the product ID associated with my product. So if you have a SaaS solution on AWS Marketplace, you would also have a product ID. And this is also a great place to request support. If you have issues going through the onboarding process, or if you have questions on what it means to launch Vendor Insights into your accounts, it's a great place to request assistance. And someone from our team will reach out and walk you through the process and help you out. So that concludes the demo. And again, that QR code just takes you to the seller guide. And this, to wrap things up, the thing that I really, what we talked about today was how Vendor Insights helps your customers easily find the security and compliance information they need to purchase products. And it dramatically reduces the the time to procurement, so reducing the sales cycle. That's the real beauty of vendor insights. And we saw how the solution works and how easy it is to deploy it. So if you're interested in vendor insights, I highly encourage you to look at all the resources that are out there. Again, you can start with the seller guide. There are blogs. There are YouTube videos on it, and it's a growing catalog of content. And if you're already on Marketplace today, selling SaaS, we encourage you to start the onboarding process. So that concludes our presentation. Philip and I are going to be here right on the side of the stage. If you have any questions, please do come up. And if this is your last session for reInvent, I hope it was a great reInvent for all of you, and safe travels home. Thank you.